Welcome to Healing Outside the Box. My name is Jean Tiberio, and I'm a nutritionist and a wellness coach. In the past, I've been a registered dietitian inside the hospital and outside the hospital, doing some nutrition counseling for a group of cardiologists in private practice. So that was the mainstream nutrition stuff. Since then, I have gotten into more preventative, plant-strong, sustainable nutrition counseling, as many of my colleagues have. I hesitate to say the word alternative because I believe it shouldn't be seen as experimental. And many other mainstream nutritionists are heading in the same direction. So what I do is I look at confusing or controversial food-related topics in the media and attempt to womansplain it for you. I certainly hope I can make things more clear, but if I don't, please get in touch with me. I love hearing from you all. I can be reached through my website email, which is healingoutsidethebox.com, and click on the Contact tab at the top. And ask me anything, within reason, of course. I can't get you tickets to a pop star concert, but I can certainly attempt to answer any food or nutrition-related question. You can also connect with me on Instagram at Jean Tiberio, or Facebook, and I dare say Twitter. Now this is part 2 of the pros and cons of weight loss surgery. And I have to say that I did it again, and what I did was get too long-winded for one episode and have to make a part 3 on this topic. So that will be coming. As I mentioned in part 1, if you or someone you know is considering weight loss surgery, you may want to speak with a professional who has no financial skin in the game first. In part 1, I discuss the different types of weight loss surgery and possible side effects. That is episode 279, and I'll put the link in the show notes. I also mentioned this in part 1, but it's worth repeating. If you are seriously considering weight loss surgery, please speak with a trusted healthcare professional. It could be a physician, nurse, dietitian, or anyone that has experience working directly with bariatric surgery patients. I wouldn't be surprised if your personal physician also recommends that you speak with a specialist who is not financially benefiting from the surgery. You may want to listen to part 1 first to get a feeling for which types of surgery may be more or less riskier than others. My opinion here is that if you're going to move forward with weight loss surgery, you may want to opt for surgery that reduces the size of your stomach rather than cutting out an entire portion of your small intestines. In the latter case, you will be dealing with lots of malabsorption problems and vitamin or mineral deficiencies. And those problems may not necessarily get better with time because you have had a portion of your intestines removed. And other portions do not necessarily adapt and absorb the necessary nutrients in most cases. An example of this is lactase, the enzyme that breaks lactose, the milk sugar, into glucose and galactose. Only glucose and galactose can be absorbed into your bloodstream, not the lactose. So you have to have this enzyme to absorb the milk sugar. Lactase resides in the middle portion of your small intestine, which is called the jejunum. This portion could be removed with some weight loss surgeries, such as the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass. If that happens, you may be lactose intolerant for life. What's the big deal? Well, the symptoms are flatulence and diarrhea. So you be the judge. I also emphasized in part 1 that dumping syndrome is not a possible side effect. It's a likely side effect. And it can happen again and again. And remember that iron deficiency anemia and B12 deficiency anemia are likely going to happen. All right, so how sustainable is this weight loss? Now, I've read a lot of sources on this, And I've run into my fair share of cases. And most people will gain back some of the weight, but they usually don't gain back all of their weight. So the question becomes, is it worth it? And that's a personal one. There is a short video by Dr. Michael Greger that gives sources of journal articles on this subject, and I'll put it in the show notes. Here's the thing about post-op eating behavior that they don't always mention. Grazing can happen. Grazing is a situation when small amounts of the wrong foods are eaten throughout the day. Another thing that proponents often don't mention is this. Patients can underestimate how hard the surgery can be after they've received it. And if patients are really honest, they will tell you that the stigma against overweight people still usually remains for them. Another difficult question is how it affects these people emotionally. There is a high risk of suicide. The number of suicide attempts are significantly greater in this population. Now, this also may include accidental overdoses, or what we call alcohol toxicity, and this can occasionally lead to death. After weight loss surgery, alcohol metabolism changes, and it can result in people getting drunk on much smaller amounts of alcohol. And there are unexpected physical problems, such as infected skin flaps after the weight loss. And, of course, there'll be some regaining of the weight, and this can have a devastating psychological effect on someone who has worked so hard and been through a lot of physical pain. Okay, here's the bottom line, in my opinion. If the only alternative is morbid obesity, then maybe the benefits outweigh the risks. And I can't make that decision for others. But here's the point I want to make. Have we really exhausted the alternatives? My gut tells me no, we have not. My gut also tells me that the potential power of the brain to fix this is enormous. In this meaning, the skyrocketing rates of overweight persons in our society. Our brain is a magnificent untapped organ. And if I may quote Olympia Dukakis, what we don't know about our brain is a lot. Okay, first of all, I just watched a fascinating video by Michael Greger about the boomerang effect, and I'll put it in the show notes. First, I want to pose this question. The healthcare team that does weight loss surgery will remind everyone to eat quality foods after the surgery. In other words, they'll suggest that you eat high-protein, nutrient-dense foods. But what do people actually do post-op once they can start eating solid foods? Do they start eating better or worse than, say, a few months prior to the surgery? To answer this, let's back up and define the boomerang effect. This is a theory that says our eating behavior is more complicated than we are often led to believe, and the advertisers have figured this out. In other words, if we try to give people incentives to not eat a certain food, say a sugary snack, will those people substitute with a deep-fried snack? Maybe. Well, probably. My gut tells me that it might have something to do with perceived deprivation. You cannot have that, and that might lead to, well, then I want this, and this. I'm going to launch into my orange story because it's a good example of this and happens to be true. I was working as a dietitian in a hospital and chatting with a coworker who was our renal dietitian. She only saw renal patients who were at some stage of kidney failure and mostly on dialysis. Because potassium had to be restricted on a renal diet, they could have meat and candy bars, but no oranges or bananas. They were given their menu for the next day, which was potassium restricted, but they could write in options for sweets. Instead, they would secretly write in an orange or banana and circle it. They had figured out that the dietitian has to okay the food by circling it, so they would cheat by circling it themselves. So when they attempted to cheat on that diet, they chose an orange rather than ice cream on the menu. So it's not about the food itself. It's about how the food makes us feel. I'll give you another example. I have a friend from the Dominican Republic that loves plantains. She cooks them like she cooks them in the DR, and I imagine it brings back fond memories of her days growing up there. Now, I grew up eating Italian food because, although I'm American, my grandparents grew up in Italy, and I remember growing up with homemade red sauces with lots of fresh basil. Now I have my own basil plant on the windowsill. By the way, it was only $5.99, the organic one. And I'll cut 4 or 5 leaves to add to my homemade marinara sauce. Before it goes into the pan, I'll ask if I can smell the basil first. It brings up all kinds of positive emotions. So there are emotions behind what and how much we eat. I imagine you know that. Here's another example of a sometimes unconscious decision-making. The government mandates a calorie listing on labels for sugary soft drinks. The soft drink industry then changes the serving size from 12 ounces to 6 ounces. People see the amount of calories and don't pay too much attention to the serving size. So they might eat more of the unhealthy soft drink because the calories, after all, don't sound that bad. But they're drinking twice as much. And consider the fact that the FDA government policymakers often get paid consulting gigs from the soft drink industry, and they're not required to disclose that. So the FDA policymakers have their own personal motive. More money equals more nice things. Back in the old days, I had done nutrition counseling for well over 100 cardiology patients when their initial cholesterol levels came in. But prior to going on meds, rather than after they went on meds. Typically, there was initial success with the dietary changes, both with the weight, cholesterol levels, and often blood pressure. But then the improvements tended to drop off over time, as is the case with most changes in eating behavior. And nutritionists were not paid by insurance companies for follow-up visits. The cardiologists then stopped prescribing statins to just about everybody, especially middle-aged men. And unlimited supplies of cholesterol meds were paid for by insurance companies. After the person starts on the cholesterol-lowering meds, most people slip back to their old habits and regain most or all of the weight. So I can't help but think that the boomerang effect is a real thing when it comes to weight loss surgery. And I have seen this to be the case more often than not. People have worked so hard prior to the surgery, losing a bunch of weight, then going to full liquids for as much as 2 weeks prior to the surgery. Then after the surgery, they will be suffering the post-op effects and will be restricted to liquids only, and then only the liquids that the Weight Loss Corporation supplies. The month before, during, and post-surgery is hell on earth. Should it be a surprise when people want to treat themselves after they've worked so hard and suffered through so many restrictive changes? Not to mention the addictive qualities of the food we currently eat. Remember that they are stopping an addictive behavior cold turkey. When a person is reintroduced to soft and then solid foods, sometimes he or she will walk around with a jelly donut and eat one bite at a time. Or they might put a chocolate bar in a blender with milk and sip on it to allow the food to slide through the stomach more easily. They are advised to eat 6 small meals with nutrient-dense foods. If I asked them, say, what their meals for one day had consisted of, the answer would be something along the lines of, well, I'm not hungry because I have my jelly donut, so I really didn't have a meal. The potentially horrible consequences of this type of eating, I imagine, is obvious. it is not only what a person eats, but what a person is not eating that can have a dramatic effect on their quality of life, not to mention the length of the life. There was another study that looked at this boomerang effect by writing a message on a Big Mac label at the bottom which read, "Remember to exercise frequently for health maintenance." The people who had the message on their label actually chose more fattening food than those with no such health message. People saw the reminder that they could walk off the extra calories, and they ate more. So the boomerang effect with weight loss surgery is a real thing and could lead to more sabotage in terms of long-term weight maintenance goals. If this is the case, should we rethink signing up everyone for surgery without a closer look at eating behavior? Absolutely. And from an ethical point of view, is cutting out our organs really an effective treatment for an addiction? Also, in the what we don't know is a lot category is this. I think there is a lot of potential in knowing how to manage our hormones to allow us to crave less of certain foods and perhaps crave more of healthier foods. But that is a topic that deserves its own podcast episode, the role of hormones in appetite and weight fluctuations. Now, I was going to go into a whole song and dance about incentive programs, both positive and negative, as an alternative to weight loss surgery. An example of a positive incentive might be free produce at the farmers markets. An example of a negative incentive could be a tax on soda. But I'm going to have a bunch to say about all of that as well, so I'm going to wait. If you remember nothing else about this podcast episode, and I know I did ramble a bit, but please remember the story about the craving of oranges. It is not about the exact food that we eat. It is about how that food makes us feel. So I will make this a 3-parter and do the third and final part on alternatives to weight loss surgery. Until then, be well and stay tuned next week for another episode of Healing Outside the Box.